This is Common Sense Radio. Straightforward and no excuses.
All right. Come on now.
This is the Steve Gruber Show.
Call me crazy.
Oh, yeah.
What I said was perfectly right and spot on accurate.
Boy's got a mouth like a cannon, always shooting it all.
Stop. Yeah, stop. I mean, you're way off script.
Got it in me. Gonna quit until it all comes out.
Hey, boy!
Been a long education.
Yeah, you know, it's not cynical. It's common sense.
Pay attention to me when I'm talking to you.
I'm gonna rock the nation. Rock the nation.
Genuine, accountable, and raw. Here is Steve Gruber.
Welcome to it, 6 after the hour on this Monday. Time to get back to work, time to get down to it. And one of the first orders of business will be cleaning up, evaluating, and going over what happened on Mackinac Island at the Republican confab over the weekend. 5 candidates showed up. But from what I understand, nobody touched Carly Fiorina, who was treated like a rock star when she rolled in. Now, Ivy and I were up there Thursday and Friday and had the opportunity to speak with Ruth Johnson and had some exchanges with the Lieutenant Governor and the Attorney General and Secretary of State, like I just said. But the big names started rolling in on Friday afternoon. We were unable to stay this time around just because of some previous obligations. But the newest member of our team, rolled in, Katie Hyde. She'll be joining us here a little bit later on the program. She had sit-down interviews with Ted Cruz and Rand Paul. Had a chance to listen to Carly and Kasich and the whole bit. It was a big deal. We enjoyed our time on the island, but we couldn't stay. But it is interesting to note how far Carly has come up. The 2 big winners since the debate, which makes sense, now in the newest poll from CNN. Carly Fiorina and Marco Rubio up dramatically. Rubio in the top tier now. Donald Trump has fallen 8 points. Ben Carson has fallen a fair amount, but the big loser is Scott Walker. He's polling 0.5%. And that hurts. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like he's going to be in it.
No, he's
it's unfortunate because he does have a lot of great ideas, and he has done a very good job from what I've read and researched in Wisconsin.
Sure.
But, he just doesn't have the fight the other ones do, I don't think,
Somewhere it just got all sidetracked for him. We met him here. You and I did, 2 months ago?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. Thought he was very good at the retail politics part of it. And thought that he had, a good plan, a good play. And it just seemed to have fallen apart for him. But the latest polling from CNN, Trump is in first place with 24%, followed by Carly Fiorina at 15%, Carson at 14%, and Rubio at 11%. Nobody else in double digits. So there's Bush, Cruz, Huckabee, Kasich, Paul, Christie. And then Walker, Perry, Santorum, Jindal, and Graham. 0. I'm just shocked that Walker's support has it's disappeared.
Well, the more I think about it, I look at Walker and in comparison to the others, and he just seems soft. He doesn't seem to have that drive, that just go get him attitude. And obviously he does because he's won
3 times.
Yeah, 3 times against labor unions. But, you just don't see it. And you don't see him as often as you see all these other people, like I had mentioned in the past. Where is he? He's not there. He's not in the public eye. So
he's disappeared from there as well. Now, speaking of politics, let me shift gears a little bit. And back to state politics. I was looking for, but did not find, the Cindy Gamrett rally on Mackinac Island or the Todd Corser rally. I didn't find, I don't know what was going on. I thought that we would have been able to find that up on Mackinac Island, but we didn't find it. The big get-together. Here's the deal. Both Todd Corser and Cindy Gammert lied to their families, to the voters, and possibly investigators from the state legislature. Who knows? Corser resigned his seat at 3 in the morning on September the 11th. An hour or so later, the State House threw out Cindy Gammert. The two had an extramarital affair with each other after running as Christian conservatives to get themselves elected. They flaunted the rules, common sense, and, frankly, common decency along the way. Now both are flaunting their disregard for the voters again, in my estimation, by jumping into the special elections called to replace them. But now by law, it's legal. It's also nauseating for most of us that are forced to watch. There are a lot of folks running in both the 80th and 82nd House districts. It is possible both could win the primary races. I am among those who remain hopeful that won't happen. I am among those that hope that the latest run for vanity will finally be the end of it. We will see. And from there, we will discuss it. You know, here's the thing. They were thrown out by the House. And the argument from Gammert's attorney, Mike Nichols and others, is that, well, the voters should have the choice. And the best opinion I saw is the voters did have the choice. You see, voters elected all the other people in the House that threw them out. You see, voters elected all of those folks that made the decision that these two have soiled and tarnished the reputation of what's going on there, not to mention they're a tremendous distraction from the work that needs to be done, most notably the roads and infrastructure in the state of Michigan. They became a circus and a sideshow, not because of anybody else, but because of their own doing. Their own doing. You know, and just because you say, I'm sorry, doesn't make it okay. Isn't that what we teach our kids?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just because you say you're sorry doesn't mean, well, you get to do it again. That's not the way the program works.
It doesn't mean that there are not consequences for your actions, which this is right on display. Well, you know, I did something wrong, but you know what? We'll just pat you on the back and you're going to run again, and maybe you get in, maybe you don't. I mean, that's kind of the mentality they have, and come on, that's not really the way to be.
Well, you know, and they've got, but make no mistake, they've got support. I've watched social media. Cindy Gammert for sure has plenty of support. But what's ironic about all of this is that with 11 Republicans running in the primary, including Todd Corser to replace Todd Corser, he may have the best chance of the two of them to remain in office. And how ironic is that? The history books, if he is reelected, will reflect only that he resigned and was reelected. It'll show that she was thrown out.
There's just not something quite right about that man. I'm sorry to say what he did about, you know,
There's just something not quite right about that man. I think that might get right down to it.
Well, I mean, come on. When you make up such a grandiose story to hide what you've been doing, there's got to be something a little bit wrong with you.
Yeah. Then he sat in Burger King parking lot for 13 hours. Well, you know. Wonder if he got up to use the bathroom. It's 14 after on a Monday. I'm talking about the Pope and social justice and a few other things straight ahead here on the Steve Gruber Show.
Getting your day started with news from around the state and around the world. Common Sense Radio. This is the Steve Gruber Show.
Your dreams were your ticket out.
It's 18 after the hour.
To that same old
Joe Biden not too far away now from jumping into this race for the White House. He's going to do it. I'll eat my hat if he doesn't do it. Hopefully a chocolate hat. But point is, Joe Biden's going to do this. I've been telling you that for some time. I believe it to be true. Now, a Democratic National Chair, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's been on this program several times. I think she's afraid to return, though. I actually asked her real questions the last couple of times she was here and tied her into knots, and I don't think she'll be back. But Debbie Wasserman Schultz heckled at an event Saturday in New Hampshire by crowd members, by Democrats, by liberals, demanding more debates for their party's presidential candidates. Crowd members shouting more debates and we want debates. Throughout Wasserman Schultz's remarks, signs that spelled out more debates were also scattered throughout the crowd. The event was the Democratic State Party's annual convention, and the incident was the latest in a series in which the committee has been called on to have more than 6 sanctioned debates. Critics of the debates, which began in just a couple of weeks, October 3rd, suggest the schedule was conceived when Hillary Clinton was the clear frontrunner and by Clinton supporters who didn't think subjecting her to challengers was a good idea. That part's true. She might actually have to speak and think and work on her feet without a teleprompter and without somebody coddling her and protecting her from questions. Wasserman Schultz has been criticized before, perhaps most notably by Democratic challenger Martin O'Malley, the former Maryland governor, whose poll numbers are in the single digits, said he needs the exposure of the debates considering he has little campaign money and name recognition. Bernie Sanders also says there should be more campaigns. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, the genius of the left, said in an LA Times interview published Friday that she thought her party should also have more primary debates this election. A blind pig and an acorn. Every now and then. Well, the Pope is coming to America. I'm sure you know that. The Pope is coming to America. The Pope is running deep into the weeds of left field again, as well as in the left field of extremist liberal politics that have failed people of the world for more than a century. Pope Francis stopped in Cuba to meet with dictator Raul Castro on the first leg of his North American tour. Castro, in a typically long-winded and self-serving speech, said Cuba, quote, founded an equitable society with social justice, end quote. Really? I'd say the truth is much closer to Cuba is a poverty-riddled nation with few prospects as a direct result of socialist, Marxist governments and welfare state failures. Now, there are many among us that would have you believe that America is to blame for Cuba's economic and social failures and problems. But by that logic, America would also be to blame for the failures of socialism in Russia, China, and Venezuela. They will point to the American embargo of the country since 1961 and conveniently forget to mention Cuban dictator Fidel Castro had nuclear missiles imported from Russia and then pointed at the United States. They will forget to mention that President John Kennedy undertook the Bay of Pigs invasion before, actually getting cold feet and allowing thousands of Cubans to get slaughtered on the beaches, but that story's for a different day. Those that blame the U.S. will forget to mention the long history of civil rights violations in Cuba, the harboring of American fugitives, including cop killers, and the thousands that have fled the island for pursuit of the real dream, the American dream of liberty, freedom, and prosperity. Now comes Pope Francis, who of late has decided his papal responsibilities are to focus on the fuzzy science of global warming and decry the evils of capitalism. Now, it seems to me he may have tripped and hit his head on the way to the pulpit. It's a possibility. During Raul's remarks, he praised his country's socialist model for building a society focused on human beings and the family and said he's firmly determined to build a just and virtuous society with high ethical and spiritual values. Yeah, thanks, Raul. Thanks for the comments. Of course, anyone who has even a basic understanding of economics, politics, or history knows this is nothing more than the standard line of misinformation that is put out by sitting dictators. In Zimbabwe, for example, dictator Robert Mugabe, fresh off his birthday feast of baby elephant, yeah, that's true, decries the evils of capitalism from his opulent mansion. He attacks Western ways in capitalism as more than 5 million people in his own country are facing starvation. Of course, like most dictators, he fails to mention the truth. In this case, that Mugabe himself murdered thousands of farmers because they were white in a misguided effort to give land back to others in his country. Mugabe's social justice sent Zimbabwe from being a nation that fed most of sub-Saharan Africa to a fill-in-the-blank, where a few prosper and the rest suffer in poverty and without food. Maybe the Pope should step down from his high horse and actually do some cursory reading and research to understand the true root of all evil is man's desire to control other men. Socialism, communism, and Marxism accounted for easily more than 100 million deaths in the 20th century. It is against this bleak backdrop that Pope Francis is apparently endorsing the thug Castro brothers and their failed communist state known as Cuba. From there, Pope Francis will travel to the United States to meet his favorite budding Marxist. That, of course, Barack Obama and His Holiness will address a joint session of Congress. No, not Obama, the Pope. Thank you. No doubt he will skip over original sin and jump right to the big sins of global warming and capitalism. It is time for the Pope to return to the scriptures and leave the issues of economics and free enterprise to those that actually understand that capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty, millions and millions of people, in fact, than any other single thing in history, period. Capitalism has resulted in people living longer, healthier, more productive lives than at any time in human history. Prosperous people eat better, sleep better, and get better medical care. The same certainly cannot be said for the slaves of the state that toil away in places like Cuba. Cuba means social justice? My ass. I think we're going to have a pretty good week here. It's the Steve Gruber Show. The hotline number, 888-900-9966. The Steve Gruber Show. Wear your helmet.
Taking a closer look at the stories that affect you most with a big dose of common sense.
Monday, Monday, so good to me. Monday morning, it was all I hoped it would be.
It's 33 after the hour. It is Monday.
Oh, Monday morning, Monday.
Steve Gruber along with you on this Monday. A lot of work to do as we roll up our sleeves to get rolling down a work week again. They're cleaning up Mackinac Island. No, not from the horses, from the candidates. And some of the stuff that comes out can be considered fairly similar. And apparently just the one altercation in the bar Thursday. No fisticuffs to fly after that. And so it is. Professor Allan Saxe joining us here, the professor of political science at the University of Texas Arlington. Of course, Professor, welcome back.
Good morning. Thank you.
So, I'm looking at the new polling here. First of all, here in Michigan, Scott Walker didn't make it, and we'll get to that in a second. Carly Fiorina treated like a rock star when she showed up at the Michigan event. Standing ovation. The other folks that came through, got warm receptions. Carly was treated like a star, and now her star is rising, number 2 in a lot of the national polls. Marco Rubio in the new CNN poll also way up since the debate. People seeing Marco Rubio as a serious candidate for the job. What do you make of it all?
Two good candidates. Marco Rubio, a lot of people have always liked him, and for some reason 6-8 months ago he sort of fell down in the polls and in popularity and in discussion on political shows, but now he's rising. And Carly Fiorina, just a rock star, just as you said. She campaigns brilliantly. She's very articulate. She has an interesting history. Obviously, they're going to use her tenure at Hewlett-Packard against her, but also she replies very well about what happened when she was CEO of Hewlett-Packard. Those were the days when the technological companies were really in bad shape, and a lot of them were going down the drain. And she did the best she could. And Hewlett-Packard emerged, I think, as a very strong company. And she's done well for herself, but she's a great campaigner. They're going to use against her that she doesn't have any political experience, but that also is a great plus, that she doesn't have any political experience. But she knows politics. She's been in and around politics for a long while. She was an economic advisor to Mitt Romney. She ran for the United States Senate in California, a very liberal state.
And got crushed.
Against an incumbent, Barbara Boxer. Nobody could have beaten Barbara Boxer in a state like California if you're a conservative Republican. So she did the best she can. So she knows politics, and I think she would be a very able candidate. Some people are even saying right now that a Rubio-Fiorina ticket or a Fiorino-Rubio ticket, I doubt if Marco Rubio would take the second position, would be a winner for the Republicans. But it's going to be difficult for Republicans to win because of just the way the election map looks. The election map now favors the Democratic Party. And when you add all the new immigrants coming in that President Obama wants to get citizenship for very quickly and get them to the polls, it's going to be a tough haul for the Republicans to win the White House the next time around in 2016.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to find out where this goes. Now, here's the big loser of all of this.
It's Hillary.
Well,
on the other side.
Yeah, on the Republican side, the big loser here is Scott Walker.
It's Scott Walker.
Scott
right.
Walker's polling at 0.5% in the new CNN poll.
Right.
0.5%. He went from being the leader, and he hasn't had a major gaffe. He hasn't done something wrong. He hasn't been disqualified or disqualified himself. He has just lost his appeal. The shine is off the pumpkin, as they say. That's
right. You're exactly right. I was afraid that was going to happen to him, frankly. He has a terrific record as governor of Wisconsin. Strong. Boy, does he does not shy away from a fight, as everybody knows. When I remember all the teachers and students from the University of Wisconsin that were mobbing the state capitol, yelling and screaming and all of that kind of stuff. And he stood his ground and won in the end. But he's not a strong campaigner. That's the deal. He just doesn't have as my students would say, the charisma. He just doesn't have the charisma to actually, or the charisma, of course,
right.
Of a better pronunciation. But one of my students said, charisma. Okay, I know what you mean.
Yeah, the well-educated kids of your college. I mean, this is junior high. I can't believe what you deal with. Donald Trump also down in the polls.
Sometimes.
Donald Trump is down in the polls in the latest CNN. Now, we'll have to see some more surveys to see if this is a trend, but he's down 8 points in the CNN poll. Does this mean the summer of Donald is coming to a close?
I think he's going to be around for a long while. We're going to know of him, but he's not going to be the star that, or the great center of attention that perhaps he once was. So I think he's going to begin to fade a little bit. And Carly Fiorina and Marco Rubio, I think, are going to come up very strongly. Ted Cruz, perhaps as well, and some others. Ben Carson, although he said something yesterday that probably is not going to put him in good standing with the media.
See, I don't know about that, though. Not in good standing with the media, but who cares what the media thinks?
That's
what
right.
He said, no, I don't think a Muslim should be in charge of this nation. I would absolutely not agree with that.
Not a good statement.
Why not?
We have to recognize, a lot of people do, that a lot of candidates have had the issue of religion raised. And, of course, first and foremost, John Kennedy, when he was senator from Massachusetts, actually came down to Texas. I think it was Houston in 1960, and stood before a Southern Baptist convention and said, I'm paraphrasing, if I am elected president, I will take my directions from the United States Constitution and federal law and not the Pope. And he said that convincingly enough that he was able to overcome a lot of religious prejudice toward the Catholic Church at that particular time. The issue of Catholicism was also raised in 1928, I believe, against Al Smith, who at that time was the governor of New York and of the Catholic faith, and Joe Lieberman, when he was the vice presidential pick, his Jewish faith, but it wasn't raised quite as much because he was the vice presidential pick. But there was a lot of hate that was spewed toward Senator Lieberman and his Jewish faith on social media.
I haven't heard the Catholics or the Jews or anybody else stand on the streets chanting death to America.
That's right.
I haven't heard anybody say we need to change the way we do the legal system in America, create our own legal system. The Muslims have Sharia law, of course.
And no riots on the street either.
Yeah, and I haven't seen, the Jewish folks or the Catholics or the Amish or the Quakers go wild and knock down buildings in New York. I'm just going to throw that out there for discussion. And I think Ben Carson doesn't lose points for this. In fact, I think he might win points for this because people are sick and tired of illegal immigrants. They're sick and tired of this country being overrun by people that don't care about this country. They're sick and tired of watching their values be shredded and their values be damned.
It's interesting because there has been on Broadway, I think it just closed, something called the Book of Mormon. And, of course, that's Mitt Romney's religion. There's not been a riot. Nobody's yelled about it. In fact, I understand that a lot of Mormons think it's funny and it's interesting, but no riots. And one has to give a tip of the hat to the Mormon Church for going along with this and understanding that the First Amendment talks about free speech.
Yeah. Hold 1 second, Professor. I've got some other questions. And speaking of religion, we can discuss the papal visit to the United States, but first a stop in Cuba to talk about social and economic justice. We'll talk about that straight ahead with the professor right here on the Steve Gruber Show.
Delivering Michigan common sense with a big dose of truth and honesty.
Well, Pope Francis in Cuba. He'll be at the United States shortly. For the first time in history, the Pope will be delivering comments to a joint session of Congress, although not everybody's going to attend. In fact, the forays by Pope Francis into left-wing politics, including global warming and apparently the evils of capitalism, have won him few friends in some places. In fact, I would suggest that maybe the Pope should stick to the Scripture and, avoid modern-day politics and not talk about things he has little understanding of, like capitalism, apparently, because capitalism has pulled more people out of poverty and created more good than any single thing in human history. Better food, better housing, better transportation, better medication, better communication, all from free markets and capitalism, not from thugs of socialism, communism, and Marxism. They've been responsible for 100 million deaths on this planet, at least. Anyhow, we're back on the line now with the professor, Allan Saxe. Professor, the Pope, this Pope seems to run far afield of what I think he should talk about, and I probably made all my Catholic friends upset, but there we go.
Well, I think there's also been very big splits in the Catholic Church as well. And it's interesting because the Catholic Church itself and Pope Francis, I understand, lives in very modest surroundings in the Vatican. Anybody that's been to the Vatican knows it's very opulent, it's very powerful and very majestic, and materialism just reigns supreme there. But the Pope has taken to living, I think, in very modest quarters and not living in the great places of the Vatican that he could be living in, that other popes have done so. So he's trying to live that life, but obviously he doesn't. Just by being Pope, he doesn't live the life of the ordinary Catholic or the ordinary human on this planet.
Yeah. He doesn't live the life of the ordinary anybody. The fact of the matter is
that is correct.
And to suggest somehow that this there's social justice and economic justice in nations like Cuba or
it's horrible.
Wherever,
that's right.
It's absurd. But you have the people here. Well, Cuba would be just fine, except the Americans have blocked the place. Well, not exactly, because the Americans are the only ones with an embargo. Cuba can get anything they want from anywhere in the world except America, so go get it. So the notion that somehow America has destroyed Cuba's economy and they would be just fine and communists would be great, there'd be flowers and rainbows and unicorns if not for America, is absolutely bunk.
I know some Cubans who have escaped from Castro's Cuba over the years and have some students right now, some students who are the I guess you might say, ancestors of people that escaped from Cuba, and they go back to Cuba to visit their relatives. And a few of them will tell you it is just locked in a time warp almost, of maybe 60 or 70 years ago. And they go back there and they know it. And I've asked them, I said, but isn't that part of of Cuban life wonderful? Because we've heard over the years their medical system is so great and so forth. At least some of my students say, no, it is not. It is. So they're pretty blunt about the horrible conditions in some parts of Cuba.
Wait a second. That doesn't make sense, Professor. I mean, they have free college educations, and they have free medical care, and they have everything that Bernie Sanders would promise you today, and they have that in Cuba.
That is a good point. That's a good point to make. Bernie Sanders ought to use Cuba as a great utopian place during his campaigns.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, come on. I can't see how anybody could take issue with Cuba and all the wonderful things that have happened there.
That is true. It is a strange anomaly that the Pope would talk this way. But maybe he'll talk a little bit differently. It'll be interesting to see what he says to the American Congress. He's fairly soft-spoken. He's not a real rabble-rouser, but it's in his words that a lot of people perhaps are listening to. But he doesn't seem at this point to be a great speaker or a great orator. But his words, very softly spoken, very measured. It'll be interesting to see what he says when he comes to the United States.
Yeah, I guess we'll find out. But his whole notion that, the capitalism is the enemy.
That's right.
That free markets is the enemy, that it's greed and the worship of money. Well, okay, greed and the worship of money, that I'll give you. All right, I'll give him that. But the fact of the matter is, again, capitalism has lifted more people up and helped more families and children and fed more people. I mean, capitalism gave us John Deere tractors, which feed the world in large part.
In fact, one has to look to China. A lot of people may not remember, but just some years ago, China was run by feudal lords. It's still a communist country on top by politics. But even their communist leaders in China understood a few years ago that in order to have a strong society and develop things, they had to move a little bit toward capitalism. And that's exactly what they've done in private ownership of land. There's a lot of billionaires and millionaires now in China. It's still very poor in the rural areas, but many people have been lifted out of complete and utter poverty and feudalism in the past 3 or 4 decades in China. And you go to Shanghai, and that's all you see are big cranes in the air. They're having economic problems, but generally their society is much different than what it was for a lot of people there. Same is true in India. Still grinding poverty, but a lot of people have been lifted out of it as well.
Yeah, there you go. And Professor, we'll keep an eye on the Pope's visit. He's here in next day or two anyhow. And he'll be up here in the United States to give that address to the joint section of Congress. We'll have to see what he has to say about that.
And then he goes to, I think, New York and Philadelphia.
You got it. Professor, always a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you, sir.
There you have Professor Allan Saxe, everybody, from the University of Texas, Arlington. A regular contributor here on the program. You can find him here on Mondays. By the way, if you want to find out more and hear complete interviews, you can go to stevegruber.com, click on the podcast link. In fact, we put up complete interviews and speeches from Mackinac Island. Our associate producer, Rob Burkhart, working all weekend to make sure that you have access to what Ted Cruz had to say, and John Kasich and Carly Fiorina and Rand Paul. They're all up on the podcast, powered by Podbean. Go to stevegruber.com, find the podcast link, click it, and bam, there you are. 52 after the hour on a Monday.